Hello, sorry to interrupt.
There should be less about
Thank you. So we're going slightly out of order because team 4 is missing one team player. Okay, so team 5 will take it. You're here? All right, so we've got Apple acquiring Netflix, so we go back to Netflix.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. Thank you very much for being here. We are team number 5 and we're going to explain to you the possible acquisition between Apple and Netflix.
Can someone close the door just?
So let's start by looking at the current situation of both companies. So Apple has a vertical business model, which means that they bet for high profits and differentiation. And that's why they build the best of the best, and part of the reasons why they have so many cash. So they have around $225 billion in cash at the moment, as they make around $1,400 a second in cash. This year, they announced that they are betting on a service strategy, so they are a little bit like leaving the hardware strategy alone, and they're betting on services to get more stable and predictable revenue streams. And that's why this year they announced they're going to launch a news service and a movie game service, for example. And they also have a lot of experience, a lot of past experience in creating content, as Steve Jobs was the one that drove Pixar from being nothing to be a multi-billion company. And on the other side, Netflix has a completely different business model. They have a horizontal business model, which means that they aim for getting as much customers as they can on every device possible that these customers own. As They also have been renamed for having a superior customer experience, which is materializing the algorithm they use, which basically suggests customers what they will look for in the future to watch. And that's why they have been so renamed for this customer experience they provide. Also, currently the company is betting on original content, and this means acquiring content and creating their content on their own. And that's why they've been called the competition of Hollywood itself, because they create content on their own. In the past, they relied on the rights over content, which are very limited. And the other team, our peers, talked about the rights that Disney has, that Netflix has from Disney that are going to expire, for example. And that's what they were relying in the past, and they're betting on their original content right now. They have grown their international revenue dramatically in the last 2 years, and they have a lot of competition recently. As the other team mentioned, Disney is going to launch a Disney Plus service, which is going to compete indirectly with what Netflix is doing at the moment. So, if a potential acquisition occurs, then what's the benefit for each of the companies? So basically, what Apple would get is a lot of customer insight, because Netflix already has a lot of data on how, where, and when people consume online content that they do not have. And they have a global presence, which means that their information and their insight is it's really valuable. And they would also have a new line of services added to their portfolio, which can mean that investors can rely on a more stable and predictable stream of revenue. And it contributes to the strategy that the company already has, which their services accounts now for around $70 billion. And they can also create a lot of potential synergies in content creation, which is the actual strategy of Netflix, by providing the past experience that this company already has. Netflix, on the other hand, would get an accelerator of their strategy, because they will get basically the financial backup of Apple to keep buying and acquiring rights over original content. And their subscriptions will grow as well, as market penetration is very variable between these two companies. So in parts of the world where Apple has a really high penetration and Netflix doesn't, this could be a platform basically for subscriptions to go up. If, for example, Apple decides to include the Netflix app, as they do, for example, with the Apple Watch in every phone that we each own. And that's a way of actually doing marketing without investing not a single penny. Also, this would contribute, if you guys are familiar with what happened today in the last quarter reports of Netflix. They're not doing very good. And their stock has been known for being really unstable. So Apple's backup could also contribute to the stability of the stock.
So here I will be briefly explaining how this transaction is going to take place regarding all the aspects that you can see here. Apple will acquire Netflix with a market cap of $150 billion as of the market closing price yesterday. And our offer would be $178 billion, meaning $393 per share with a premium of 20%, which will be paid all in cash. Also, as a result of this transaction, division of Apple TV will be dissolved, and a new division as Netflix will be added. Also, the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings, will remain in his position, and one board member of Netflix will be added to the board of Apple as a matter of better integration and also incentive for Netflix. The estimated closing time is estimated to be late 2020. Also, a synergy of more than $1 billion is expected to be realized, and will be explained later on. So, moving on to financials, here you can see a highlight of financials for both companies. This is to take into consideration to compare these two companies at first, and also the other point is the negative cash flow of Netflix for more than $3 billion, which has been mostly because of content creation. They had spent like 33% more than last year, which hasn't paid off so far. Now my colleague will explain more on the financials.
Yeah, looking more into the financials, one can see that the financial power of Apple right now. So during the past years, they have repurchased shares worth $215 billion. They have invested into marketable securities net worth of $225 billion. Since 2012, they've every year created at least $30 billion of free cash flow, and their current cash and marketable securities on hand is $225 billion. And on the other side, you can also see that kind of Apple is highly depending on the iPhone, which makes 60% of their current total sales, and their revenue growth is flattening. So from this perspective, we see Apple has to or should utilize its financial strength to kind of find the next big thing. And if you go to the next slide, we believe should be done by an acquisition, and it should be done by the acquisition of Netflix. We have several disadvantages of organic growth into the industry Netflix is right now, what Apple is also planning currently. So building up the expertise would definitely take time. There would be no guarantee of being actually successful, and it would be highly costly. So if you compare Netflix investments into current content currently, which is several billions of dollars every year, and you would discount the future cash flows that are required for investing into content every year for Apple, this would make up a present value of around $150 billion to $200 billion just into content for Apple. So why do we think Netflix is a great target for Apple? Because Netflix is a fast-growing company in a growing industry, and it's an industry pioneer, so it fits to Apple's to Apple. The revenue model is highly recurring. You have highly predictable cash flows, which is from a financial perspective really good. And Netflix is currently burning a lot of cash every year. So also for Netflix, it's if you go back. Sorry. For Netflix, it's also a good strategy to have a combination with Apple because they require so much financials right now to kind of facilitate their growth. And as we mentioned before, competition is increasing. So it's going to be harder for Netflix in the future. And that's why we think right now is a good point for Apple to acquire Netflix.
Right, so looking at our ratio analysis, we can, before the consolidation, we can identify that Apple is a financially strong and solid and sound investment to make for investors. But post-consolidation, we can see that there is a drop in the liquidity ratio, and this is mainly due to, as David mentioned, Apple's stock repurchase program, as well as the fact that they have taken Netflix's debts as well as assets into their financial statements. Now, the insignificant change in the solvency ratios indicates that it is a less risky investment for investors, and therefore that this acquisition would be a good deal for Apple. So now coming to the juicy part of it, and that is the value for the shareholders. We can see that there would be an improved growth of 3%, which is a perpetuity that would last forever. Apple would now, after combining their market capitalizations, they would have a new market capitalization of over $1 trillion, being one of the few companies to make it to that point. Coming into expansion of new markets. Now, we all know Apple is mostly related to phones, computers, and as well as music streaming services, but they do not have anything that is related to what Netflix does. So now they would be expanding into a new market, a new business model, and eventually revenue diversification for them. Both companies would benefit from the acquisition, as they would gain access to a larger capital, which means, as what we were trying to say, they would have more investment into content development and overall growth.
Yes. So look at the past experience. Apple already acquired many companies, and majority is running at a subsidiary. Yes, learning from that, we have integration plan. Like before the first step, the process of M&A, and then the transition. So both team aspects of the technical team, we work together. And then we have post-acquisition. So Netflix will be the official streaming service of Apple. So we have possible synergies. We say there are two aspects over here. Firstly is content, and secondly is the marketing. In terms of content, we have accelerate the ability to develop the content. And the second is, we acquire the content. We combine the content of both of them together. And for marketing, Apple, we share the data, and especially as a typical is supporting the right time to target customers.
Hey, thank you, Han, for this intuitive section. Now let us talk about the ever-present issue of risks in such big deals. We have, in this specific one, I divide the 4 core ones. The first one is the culture of it. It revolves around the ideas behind both companies, Apple and Netflix. We have identified that have very different management structure, a horizontal and vertical one. Therefore, there's a very high possibility of these core synergies clashing with each other and creating a very bad situation for this new conglomerate. This is why it is, you see the yellow severity of this problem. The next one, however, is much more difficult to deal with because it's called the value destruction. This one specifies that the market as a whole is going to negatively react towards this acquisition. Netflix subscribers who maybe hate or dislike Apple could potentially remove their subscriptions, and we lose a lot. There's a very high potential that we lose customers. The next one is called financial risk. It's green because it's the most common one that occurs in this type of business. It specifies that there's a very high possibility of market fluctuation, specifically in the stock market, as well as there's a potential that there might be massive layoffs in the new combined company. The last but not least is the competitive process. While it might not sound as bad, it is actually as difficult to deal with as a cultural fit. It suggests that there will be other large companies that might be involved in this deal once they get acquainted with it. At first we theorized that Disney and Netflix might be potentially interested and might enter this race for Netflix. However, we believe that because of how much capital they spend on their own personal content like Disney Plus and Amazon Prime, they are not going to purchase Netflix as a whole. Nevertheless, I believe that their presence would create attract other big sharks that might be interested in this deal, and they might potentially rip it apart. And on this terrible disappointment, it is time to end this show. Thank you for your attention. Good night.
Questions from the panel? Challenges?
What other competitors would you expect would have the capacity to step in? Who could be at $175 billion? Who else could do this?
Possibly not all in cash, but the main competitor would be Disney and our that was mentioned, but they are not really in the capacity to pay this money in cash for this. So we think that Apple is the most powerful one.
To add on to that, also, I believe, in my opinion, most of these companies are in now a race to become exclusive. So you have a lot of broadcasters that are now digitalizing and going completely exclusive. So in order to, as Delara mentioned, like our main competitors would be Disney with their recent merger with Comcast and Hulu. They would be a huge major competitor, but it is still open and still too early to identify who, specifically who would be major competitors.
So, so Netflix isn't doing so well, so Apple would acquire them. What about the acquisition would turn things around at Netflix?
So what we are proposing is that Apple keeps Netflix as a separate entity for a lot of reasons. The first one is the evident cultural difference between the two companies. So that's a potential risk if Apple integrates Netflix into their structure. So we're suggesting for them to keep it as a separate entity, and also because of the value of the brand that they already have built, and that's the value of the brand is demonstrated by the loyalty of subscriptions, which is around 90%, which decreased this quarter. We're not gonna hide it. It has decreased, especially in America, but we believe that with Apple's backing, that could go up again.
Why?
Because of the value proposition of Netflix. They're trying to compete with original content, but their only restraint is cash or financing to actually buy it or produce it, because it takes around 4 to 5 years to produce original content, and these negotiation processes of actually buying content also take a lot of time and money. So basically Netflix is acquiring whatever they can at the moment, and that's why they've been losing money in the last quarters, because they have been investing massive amount of money. As Delara mentioned, there's been a 33% increase from last year to this one in original content acquisition, either rights or original production. So that's why we believe that actually accelerating Netflix strategy, because they're constrained with the cash, would be a massive disruption in the market, and it would be really hard for competitors to catch up.
Yeah, there's a question about, Apple has done acquisitions in the past. In my view, Apple likes to brand everything, but then they didn't do that with Beats. Was that a successful acquisition? Did it work out?
I personally don't know the numbers as of yesterday and today of Beats, so I cannot say. But from a customer perspective, I can tell you that I keep seeing them everywhere. For example, last week I was looking for a pair of those wireless headphones, and the first ones that pop up are Beats if you Google them. So from a customer perspective, I would say they're not doing bad, because they keep launching new products.
Well, I was just wondering about your decision to kind of keep it separate as a separate branded company, and then kind of an add-on to that. I think they're investing some in Apple TV, and how does that all work?
That works perfectly, because what Apple is trying to do is to become the platform where as consumers are going to consume all the content we want. And that includes news, that includes music, and that includes also video streaming, in which they don't have presence at the moment. So the Apple TV, in my personal opinion, was a complete failure, because it was basically a black box which was very expensive, and it was basically an add-on to your TV, in which you just could see a catalog of content, to get in. So what Apple is trying to do now is forget the idea about the Apple TV and basically build an online platform where people can acquire all the content that they have. So there's a lot of speculation saying that Apple is going to charge us a subscription model as, for example, Spotify or Netflix do, in which they're going to charge you, for example, between $75 and $100 a month, and that it is going to include hardware and services of Apple altogether. So if you pay, I don't know, $80 a month or whatever amount, that's what analysts are saying, then you get a new subscription in which you're going to have access to more than 300 newspapers and magazines. They already have deals with 300 magazines. So you have all your video games, all your news, and now all your video content. So basically you just have to use one platform to acquire everything. And that subscription is also going to, they speculate that it's also going to include their hardware products. So if you pay $100 a month for 2 years, then you get a new iPhone every 2 years. And you keep all the services with you at the same time with the same subscription. So going back to your question, it matches perfectly because Apple doesn't want to become the new content producer. They just want to be the platform through which consumers acquire all the content. So it matches perfectly with what Netflix has
But then why buy Netflix?
Why?
Yeah, because I mean, if they want to just be the gateway, I guess, then why do they want to own the content? And I'm struggling with the strategic rationale.
Okay, cool.
Like, why? It's a very good question. Point is like, if after the acquisition, the Apple, we have a chance to become the biggest digital landlord. And also, as for the user, around 600 million users in the Apple ecosystem, they have a chance like Apple will control 90% of their screen time, including Apple, the whole world, Apple, the iPhone, MacBooks, everything, and Netflix.
From a financial perspective, why we propose this deal is because Apple needs another impulse in their revenue growth. So right now their growth is flattening, so they need an impulse that delivers them the growth they are looking for, and we believe that Netflix is a perfect target for them because Netflix has this huge growth prospects that they deliver in the future, but they are struggling on the financial side, so they need investments into content. And Apple is constantly generating so much cash that they could easily, if a fraction of this cash, improve the capital structure of Netflix, decrease the interest expenses, make the cost structure of Netflix more efficient, aligning it more with Apple's cost structure, and doing this, creating value for shareholders already, and then also not having to invest as heavily into their own divisions and kind of reallocating these resources towards Netflix.
I guess another question is just the subscription model you're talking about, whatever, $100 a month. Does that include Netflix, or is that on top? You have to still pay Netflix.
The idea is that the subscription is personalized. I mean, we don't know how it's going to work exactly, but what people are speculating is that you can choose. I mean, there's a range in the subscription, so basically you can choose the services that you want, because maybe you don't want news, but you want video games, or the other way around. So basically, you're gonna pay an amount for the subscription depending on the services and on the hardware that you want from them.
The idea is that instead of buying multiple subscriptions once per month, it's just amounts to one single one, and then that's the only thing on your bill left, instead of like all these multiple transactions that might even exceed the specific amount that Apple proposes.
So if I may continue, I'm looking at Apple's acquisitions. Now Apple is known not to like big acquisitions. The biggest they had, if I'm looking at this, was $3 billion with Beats. The rest were only in the hundreds of million, only a handful of them. This would be multiple times over, with a lot less strategic or operational fit to what Apple is doing. Did you quantify how much more value this would add to Apple versus their other acquisitions versus, for example, or building this themselves? I mean, it is quite a lot of money, and they are very capable of developing things like that by themselves. So my question to you was, how strong of a strategic fit is this financial fit what are their other options? Are we saying this is, how different are we that you guys are recommending team to purchase Netflix versus saying, let's take other venues right now?
So what we have to look at is what is the alternative for Apple. So the alternative is for them to enter the entertainment business as they are planning right now, spending billions of dollars on content.
We said they want to be the platform, right? If I still understand correctly.
They also want to invest into their own content.
Okay.
So they would have to invest billions of dollars into new content.
Right.
That
At
would take time.
178 billion or less?
Yes. So Netflix, for example, is investing $15 billion every year into
Mhm.
content. It's going to increase to $18 billion,
Mhm.
and if you look at these numbers, and if Apple seriously wants to compete on a level of Netflix, they need to invest several really similar amounts into content,
Mhm.
and this is only content part of it. And if they would have to constantly invest $10 billion into content, this would be already $150 billion in total present value of required investments. And if they would invest $50 million, it would be $200 billion present value. And and it's only the content part. And then they have to execute it and marketing and all this. And we see it is better for them to acquire, in this case, Netflix, try to keep it as a separate entity, improve the capital structure, create value by improving the cost structure, and then sitting on the growth prospect of Netflix and let them facilitate the growth.
On the other side is not only the content, but also taking into account that they have presence in 190 countries, and based on their modification of their algorithms, which are based on customer experience and on the interaction that customers actually have with the platform. Those insights are as valuable as the content is, and can be used. The insights can be used or implemented in other revenue streams that Apple has. So it's also the consumer knowledge that we would be acquiring.
Yeah, they're actually looking for a kind of diversification in their portfolio as well. So they had done 106 acquisitions during this 40 years of existence. This one is actually, as you said, it's the major milestone for them. But they hasn't had this much of cash during their time. So this is how they are going to really hit their goals.
What's the financial impact on earnings per share to do this deal? It's all cash.
We didn't calculate earnings per share. We can say the kind of what could be added to EBIT. That could be, depending on the assumptions we made. We assume that the EBIT will increase by 30% for the next 3 years for Netflix. This amount could be added to the bottom line of Apple. And
I'm just curious, Apple has been a pretty prolific repurchaser of its own shares with its cash balance, so if it was, what's the comparison between just taking this cash and repurchasing shares versus doing this deal and enhancing EPS? What's the net outcome?
as we've seen in the past 5 years, they've invested $30 billion into shares. So they could just stop it for 5 years and then keep going and refilling their cash levels and repurchasing shares from then on again.
I have a question. Apple is, most of their acquisitions are technical acquisitions, patent acquisitions, buying companies because they want the engineering talent. And that's, been a formula for success. They have not gotten into original content. I mean, Pixar is not the example as Jobs, and it's a great story, but it's not really their strength. Hollywood and the creation of content is a risky business. It takes a whole different mindset, a whole different set of talents, and probably a very different corporate structure to be successful. You're gonna have hits, you're gonna have losers, and that's the history of Hollywood. So for Apple to get into that, it's a change in culture which could actually, have problems with their current success, which is the way they run their business. And I question whether, and the second thing is what they are moving into is being, content aggregators. I mean, in terms of news and magazines, they're not producing that. They're putting deals together to make it easy to access it and rather than buy a subscription to the Washington Post and eventually to the New York Times, you know, they would like to have one platform where you don't have to deal with that. You pay one amount because they have, you mentioned 600 million consumers, they have over a billion devices around the world. So their brand, other than Beats, they've been very protective, as was mentioned before. And so even in the content space, why would they change for Netflix, which might be the leader, but Disney's coming in and Disney has financial resources? Why would they pick anyone, in fact, rather than continue with the aggregation and eventually make deals with Disney and make deals with Netflix? And essentially, you know, if it's $10 a month that the consumer pays Netflix, maybe Apple pays them $8 and the other $7, and it's now being done through their package. I'm not sure whether I'm wondering, how do you make the leap that Apple wants, just for financial reasons, to go from the creation of software and aggregation services to content, which is a hit or miss and a whole different set of talents that they don't have experience in?
I would say that it's a way to get competitors out of the way, because as we said before, Apple's cash is going to accelerate Netflix strategy, right? So if they enforce or enhance their value proposition, which is actually providing us with the best content, and they have unlimited money to do so, then competitors are not going to be able to catch up, and they will only have the chance to surrender to Apple's conditions on participating on their subscription-based platform, I would say. Like basically doing that before another competitor comes in the way and has enough bargaining power to say to Apple, we don't want to be part of your platform or your marketplace service. We just want to run it on our own.
That's an interesting rationale. I mean, you got Amazon, it has unlimited financial resources and growth, they're not, they're just they're basically a middleman with amazing technology for logistics. Apple doesn't have, such a different culture and such. I can see there might be a reason for that, but you're basing it on that's the reason you would buy it, to take them out of the market, and then somebody else, in a sense, holding it back from their strategy of having all that Netflix has.
I think it's a very good point. How effective has Amazon Prime been at disrupting Netflix success? Are they the next biggest competitor, or are they farther down the food chain? Because unlimited resources, if they're not beating Netflix now, they've got all the cash they need, so it's not like the Apple would be successful by just following that model.
Well, as of now, we know, as of actually the second quarter report, we know that Netflix lost a lot of their subscribers internationally. They did not meet their targets, etc. Coming back to your question, Amazon Prime is going to be a huge competitor. If not, they're already competing. And I would say, my personal opinion, they are ahead of Netflix just because they are shifting from being a middleman, as you said, now to a complete shipping and logistics industry. So they do have unlimited financials, etc. But in the future, that's one of the reasons why we want to emphasize on Apple acquiring Netflix, so that they can also help Netflix and as well be focused on their main exclusivity more with Spotify, which they are also losing in terms of overall user engagement and growth.
Are they losing it because they don't have the money to compete?
Sorry, who does not have
Netflix. Are they losing ground because they don't have the money?
They are losing it because I feel, from my understanding, they are losing it because they are not, they are not, as I mentioned before, exclusivity. All the major broadcasters are going exclusive. So Netflix recently lost their most popular show, which was Friends. They lost the rights to air them in, I think, 2020. And this is now all gone to Hulu, which is part of Comcast and Disney. So technically Netflix has now reached the point where they may not grow as they have been growing so far, but they would just start plateauing and maybe even decline. So being acquired by Apple could be a booster for them in terms of content generation and growth.
So the growth at this point is from original product generation?
Yes, I feel so.
Okay. So so you're saying they would move into Apple, they would take over Apple TV. So their market base would kind of collapse into only what they're going to distribute through
No.
Apple.
That doesn't mean that they're gonna take Apple TV. What you're proposing is those are two different things. So
Oh,
Apple's
sorry, I thought I had read somewhere that you would get rid of Apple TV.
Yes.
Okay.
yeah, that's what Apple's strategy suggests, because what they're trying to be is the marketplace for you to consume whatever content, and that was the aim of the Apple TV, but it didn't work. So they're trying to do it in a different way.
I think that the whole concept of Apple TV can be encapsulated in Netflix alone, and the revenue that is generated from Apple TV is not very substantial. So I think that it's worth of omitting the cost for Apple TV and just dedicate and devote it to Netflix. That's the purpose.
You're targeting someone who watches Apple TV and sees Hulu and Amazon Prime, and so I'm getting everything. So now I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to lose all that stuff and just have to watch Netflix.
Yeah, the thing is that they can be everywhere. Everyone can browse them and just bring them up. But Apple TV is not. Many people are not finding this very helpful.
Let me stop you. We're starting to run into the other team's presentation. Thank you very much.